Hello everyone, welcome to today's news chatter. Let us begin with the prelims practice because recently the government of India introduced the national mission to prevent cervical cancer. So that's how much importance the government is giving to prevent cervical cancer, and that's why you need to know about it too. So three statements are provided and they have asked how many of the above statement are correct. First statement, almost 50% of the cervical cancer cases are linked to infection with a high risk human papilloma virus. HPV virus is the cause for the cervical cancer, but 50% is a wrong fact. It is 99%. So whenever they give any specific number in a statement, you have to be very careful. There is a very high chance it can be a wrong statement. Second statement, cervical cancer is the second most common cancer among women in India, which is a correct statement. The third one, it is the Serum Institute of India, which had launched an indigenous HPV vaccine known as Cervavac. This statement is also correct. So two statements are correct here. So the answer will be only two statements are correct. Let's begin with the first topic, that is Indus H Summit. Anything related to defense, anything related to international cooperation of two countries, which involves India, becomes very important. Indus H is a joint India-United States Defense Acceleration Ecosystem Summit. Defense acceleration ecosystem. That means we need to improve or increase our engagement with United States of America when it comes to defense. So what we do, we need to engage our business platforms together. We need to engage both the nation's governments together. We need to engage multinational organizations together so that there will be more defense cooperation and collaboration. Who are all organizing this Indus H Summit? It is organized by Innovations for Defense Excellence, IDEX. Innovation for Defense Excellence was started in the recent time by India and United States to improve their defense programs, to transfer high-end technology from United States to India. Under the Department of Defense Production, Ministry of Defense, Department of Defense of United States of America, in conjunction with US-India Business Council. US-India Business Council plays a very major role when it comes to trade relationship between both the countries. And one more body, that is Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers. You need to remember this information very well. If you are getting a question, they may ask this statement. So the aim of the Indus H Summit is to advance defense innovation and collaboration between India and United States. So it's a simple summit where Indian government, United States government, representatives from both the governments, Indian business leaders, United States business leaders, Indian defense manufacturers, United States defense manufacturer, all these people will come together, will talk about the future cooperation and collaboration, and will come up with more projects for the future. So that was all about Indus H Summit. What are deemed forests? This topic is solely important from prelims point of view. Some important points are there which you can use in mains also. But what exactly is a deemed forest? Yesterday in the news chatter, we discussed about the Forest Conservation Act, the recent amendment to Forest Conservation Act, which happened in 2023, and the Supreme Court's verdict about Forest Conservation Act. Those topics are very important. Try to study those topics very well. So deemed forest is a concept which comes from these topics. What exactly is a deemed forest? Deemed forest are certain category of forest which are not classified by the government exclusively as forest, but it is deemed as a forest because it has more forest cover, it has more tree cover. The flora and fauna are more than the normal propagation. So we call it as deemed forest. It is a concept introduced by the Supreme Court of India. So in 1980, for the first time, the Indian government passed the Forest Conservation Act. So the central government recently gave a data. This data is important from mains point of view. According to this, the central government said around 4 million hectares of forest lands were diverted from forest to commercial use from 1951 to 75. 4 million hectares were transferred. But from 1980, after passing of the Forest Conservation Act, from 1981 to 2022, the average annual diversion of forest has reduced to about 22,000 hectares due to Forest Conservation Act. So this clearly shows how important Forest Conservation Act is. So recently in 1996, the Supreme Court of India gave a verdict in T.N. Godavarman Tirmalpad versus Union of India, in which the Supreme Court said forest had to be protected irrespective of how they were classified, because in several states and union territories, all the forest lands were not classified as forest land by the government. So the Supreme Court said that just because the government has not classified, we cannot ignore those lands. We need to consider all the forest lands. So the Supreme Court said we cannot use the definition of forest as mentioned in the Forest Conservation Act. We should use a dictionary definition. That means any land which has high amount of tree cover, high amount of flora and fauna, we will consider it as forest. This is what Supreme Court told in T.N. Godavarman Tirmalpad judgment. This brought the concept of deemed forest. So deemed forest is when a forest land is not exactly classified as forest by the government, but it is deemed as forest because of the judgment by the Supreme Court. What is deemed forest? Tracts that were not officially classified as such in government records. States were asked to constitute expert committees to identify such deemed forest. During this Tirmalpad case, Supreme Court told that state governments and union territories should try to classify these forests, include them in the records very soon, but most of the states and union territories did not do that. So this is the basics of deemed forest. We were discussing about the National Cervical Cancer Control Scheme in our prelims practice question, but you need to know what exactly the scheme is about. So recently, the finance minister during budget presentation mentioned that the government of India will introduce a national cervical cancer control scheme in which girls of 9 to 14 years of age will be provided with HPV vaccine, that is human papilloma virus vaccine. The reason for this scheme is the cervical cancer in the recent time has increased to a greater extent among the female population of India. Death rate has also increased. The cervical cancer at present serve as the second most influential cancer among women of India. So it is time for the government to prevent this disease. So the vaccine has to be provided to teenage girls before they get married or before they engage in sexual intercourse. This is the reason they are providing the vaccine for a particular age group. Who is manufacturing this vaccine? It is the Serum Institute of India, which is manufacturing this vaccine. The most important point here, its name is called as Cervavac, cervical cancer prevention vaccine. So it is called as Cervavac. And the most important point, it is a quadrivalent human papilloma virus vaccine. Quadrivalent means it acts against 4 different variants of cervical cancer virus. So it can prevent 4 different variants of cervical cancer. So these are all the most important points you need to know. So how this scheme will be implemented and further details are yet to be given by the government, but before going to the examination, you need to know the basics at least. The most important topic of today, right to maintenance. When we talk about the UCC, that is Uniform Civil Code, we tell that every religion has a separate personal law in India, but it is time to pass a uniform civil code where all the religions will have similar kind of laws when it comes to civil matters such as marriage, divorce, adoption, etc. So one important example which you can mention even in your answers in mains is about the right to maintenance of Muslim women, because Muslims in India follow the Muslim personal law. According to Muslim personal law, an act was passed, that is Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce, 1986. According to the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce 1986 Act, it is mentioned that after divorce, if the woman is not employed and if the woman is dependent on the male for her survival, then it is the responsibility of the male to provide for the life or lifestyle of the woman, that is the maintenance. So every month he has to provide some maintenance amount to the women and the child if they have any, until the period of Iddat. Iddat period is the 3 months period from divorce. So only for 3 months this will be provided. This was the provision according to the 1986 Act. But according to the section 125 of CRPC, a magistrate of first class, a judicial magistrate, can order a monthly allowance for the maintenance of divorced wife, which is not restricted for 3 months. It can go even more than that. So this was the problem. Whether if a Muslim couple is getting divorced, which of the above provision should be maintained? Should we follow the section 125 of CRPC, or should we follow the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce? This was the question. So the Supreme Court gave a verdict in Daniel Latifi versus Union of India in 2001, in which the Supreme Court upheld the validity of 1986 Act by telling that it is a personal law, so personal laws will be having prominence over CRPC. But again, in 2009, a divisional bench of the Supreme Court said that it reiterated the right to claim maintenance as long as the woman does not remarry. It told until the women don't remarry some other person, the man has to provide for maintenance. This was what was mentioned in 2009. So two different verdicts which are against each other. So this is why the confusion happens. So this is where it is time for the union government to bring out a uniform civil code, or it is time for the Supreme Court to give clarification about everything that is in the in the personal law also. So when we talk about this kind of issue, what can be your stand? If you are asked in mains examination or interview, what will you give? You can tell that right of divorced women cannot be taken away only from one section of divorced women of our country. So when all the rest of the country, all the rest of the religions and communities are following certain law and regulation, try to make laws and regulation which is of equal standards. Do not make laws and regulation which are against or which are regressive to the standards which are followed by other communities. So this is first point. And whenever a law is there, try to ensure Article 14, 15, and 21 are upheld. Right to equality, and right to life and personal liberty, right against discrimination. So these things should be maintained. So anyways, we do not have to take a complete stand. We can just tell that these things have to be maintained because it is sub judice. The Supreme Court is yet to give a verdict regarding this, and maybe in near future we will come up with a uniform civil code. Main question of the day: what is a personal law? Critically examine if removal of personal law would promote unity in India. Removal of personal law might not promote complete unity in India because it can be seen as something which is against the religious freedom of the people. We need to maintain Article 25 also. So the conclusion here is we have to implement a uniform civil code in a step-by-step manner. First, we can take marriages, then we can take divorces, then we can take other provisions, whatever is required. So in that manner, we can implement it. One important point for mains examination: nuclear power is one of the most important non-conventional source of electricity, which is completely non-pollutant in nature. So we need to give importance to nuclear power. India is trying to build several nuclear power plants all over the country so that India will become a energy excess country. We do not have to depend on import of coal or petroleum to generate electricity. So nuclear power contributes at present to less than 2% of India's total electricity generation. India will invite private players to invest about $26 billion in nuclear energy sector. With this investment, the government is hoping to build 11,000 megawatt of new nuclear power generation capacity by 2040. So this is the target set by the government. So if they are getting a question related to nuclear power generation, you can mention that at present it is just 2% of total electricity, but government is planning to increase it to 11,000 megawatt. It has already asked the private companies to invest about $26 billion in it. So that will be all for today. Take a note of all the important points we have discussed in the class today. We will meet tomorrow. All the best.